Hey, how's it going? So recently I put out a video, and you can check it out. I'm not going to rehash the whole thing, about how I failed Army Ranger School about 13 years ago and how it had dramatic effects on my life, my mental health, as well as specifically my career as an Army infantry officer. Again, you can watch that whole thing. The point of this video here, after so many years, is I want to back this up even further. I want to tell the story of, for one, why I joined the military. For two, why I wanted to be an infantry officer and go to Ranger School. And then for three, what happened to me specifically, and it is very much connected to Ranger School. How people treated me, toxic leaders, the things that they did that severely affected my mental health, and ultimately why I decided to leave the Army. So let's dig right into this. So I wanted to join the military since I was a kid. I know some of you guys watched the video, and honestly, there were definitely a lot of positive feedback, by the way, and I thank you guys for that. But there was definitely some negative feedback as well. And people saying, you know, that, oh, he's trying to say that he's special because he was a top cadet. That wasn't the point of what I was trying to say. That's misconstruing what I was saying. Let me back this up. So when I was a kid, I was not special by any means. A lot of you who might be either in the military or veterans could probably relate to who I was, at least in certain ways. I was a kid that wanted to be in the military. I had family ties to the military, probably like a lot of you. My dad was a Navy helicopter pilot. My brother, he served as a paratrooper, the 82nd Airborne. He served over in Iraq, and he saw a lot of conflict and combat. I'm sure a lot of you can probably relate to that as well. So I'm not special. What I did see, and this again is probably very relatable as well, is when I came home as a middle school student, I saw the videos that my parents were watching of the planes that were crashing into the World Trade Center. And from that point forward, I had this idea that I wanted to do something about it. So that's not me being special. That's just probably a lot of you guys, okay? Fast forward a number of years, I'm in college, and I kind of went back and forth, different things. I decided I wanted to be a wildlife biologist, but my brother was serving his tour over in Iraq, and that kind of reinstated my earlier childhood vision of wanting to serve in the military. So I ultimately decided to change paths. I joined ROTC. And, you know, the other thing is, and this is not me being special either, because most Army infantry officers are probably similar in certain ways. I was a type A personality. I was always trying to do the best that I could in everything, whether it's athletics, academics, or anything. So again, that's not me being special. Probably most Army infantry officers were like that. So I was like that too. I always wanted to be a top performer, and I tried as hard as I could in everything that I did. But you know, fast forward and the whole Ranger School thing happened. Again, you can watch that whole video. I'm not going to rehash it all right here. What I do want to talk about more is what happened when I got to my unit without a tab. So I showed up to Fort Hood, Texas. I'm not going to say specific units or specific individuals, but I showed up to Fort Hood, Texas. And the first person who I basically had to interact with there was the squadron executive officer, or a battalion for most units executive officer. And he definitely did not like me. And he didn't give me a chance. And it's because I didn't have a tab. I mean, people could assume that I immediately did all of these wrong things, and that's not the case. I showed up without a Ranger tab. So that is why he disliked me. And he made it very well known that I was basically a that's pretty much what he told me, to be totally honest with you, is that you're a worthless actually what he was trying to tell me from day one. And I remember shortly after showing up to my unit, I tested positive for strep throat at the unit, hospital on base. And he was not happy that I ended up going into sick call and tested positive for strep throat. He called me in. He was yelling at me on the phone. He was swearing at me. He was reminding me that I'm have a Ranger tab and that I probably just quit Ranger School and I did this. He's yelling all these things. He's cursing at me. He didn't like me because I didn't have a tab. He forced me to go into the office after I tested positive for strep throat. I remember sitting there outside his office at the end of the work day or in the afternoon. And the command sergeant major walked by, and I think he could tell that something was off because I was severely sick at the time. I had tested positive for strep throat, and I had a 103-degree fever. Okay. The captain, by the way, to back up a little bit, who was the PA at the hospital, absolutely said that what this major was doing was illegal. He told me that directly, but I was a young lieutenant, and the XO was swearing at me on the phone saying, you better get to this installation now and come right to my office. So despite the fact that the PA was telling me that his instructions were illegal, I still followed it, and I showed up. And then the CSM, he's like, really? So you tested positive for strep throat? I showed him the paperwork that showed that I tested positive for strep throat. And he told me, that's not right. He didn't say much more else because, you know, I was a young lieutenant, and, you know, that was probably above my pay grade to hear his thoughts about what had happened or whatever. But he walked away, and then I waited there with a 103-degree fever outside the office, and this major so-and-so did not show up. He just forced me to show up with a 103-degree fever and strep throat and didn't even show up to meet me. So that's how I was basically introduced to my unit as a non-tabbed officer. Goes a little bit further. There's another officer there. This was an officer who was highly respected in the unit for a lot of different reasons. You know, well accomplished overseas, obviously Ranger tabbed, a bunch of different things. He was definitely, I would say, probably the most accomplished captain in the unit as far as just all the different reasons for why someone would say someone is accomplished. I won't go into them all. And he very much disliked me, and he spread a lot of nasty comments about me. And I'm not going to talk about all of them, but what I do want to highlight is that as he was a troop commander or a company commander, for those of you who are not cavalry, I was on staff duty as a first lieutenant. I'd been in the unit for about, you know, a year and a half. I was first lieutenant. And a private who was on staff duty actually came up to me and said, Lieutenant Johns, why does Captain so-and-so hate you so much? And I didn't really discuss too much back and forth with him because that wouldn't have really been my place. But what I will say is that this young private did tell me that Captain so-and-so has been talking a lot about you in the unit and how you're a piece of because you don't have a Ranger tab and this and this and this. And there's other examples. I'm not going to say that everyone in the unit treated me like that, but there were a lot of tabbed officers, peers and superiors. There was very much a toxic mindset among groups of these tabbed officers. Here's another story. So I had been hearing this term TB for quite a bit of time. I didn't know what it meant. Still around the same time frame. I'd probably been in the unit for a year and a half or whatever. I was still working in the operations office, not thinking that I was going to get a platoon at that point. I did end up getting a platoon later on, but at that point, based on everything that was happening, I did not feel that I was probably ever going to get a platoon because I was basically just being told over and over by all these people that I'm a piece of because I don't have a Ranger tab. I kept hearing TB and wondering, what is TB? TB. I wouldn't really understand the context aside from the fact that I would always hear TB being told by tabbed lieutenants or captains in these different operation shops at my unit. And they would always be talking kind of quietly and you would hear TB. And it didn't dawn on me until finally I accidentally overheard a conversation between two first lieutenants, who I'm not going to name, who used the term. And then I finally realized that TB was someone like me or another another untabbed officer without a Ranger tab in the unit. TB was tablet. That's what I was to a great majority of these tabbed officers. I'm not going to say all of them. That might not be fair. Quite a few of them I would hear use that term. So I was a tab, and this was reinforced in my mind for years. I served for years. I ended up being a platoon leader. I did serve ultimately as the squadron logistics officer. I did have some officers, by the way, in my last year that I did not think were toxic at all. And some of them actually had Ranger tabs, and I'm not going to name them either because I'm just not going to name anybody. But I did actually like my last squadron executive officer. He was a great guy, and he was Ranger tabbed, and he treated me with respect. And I worked for him as the squadron logistics officer, and he thought I did a great job. And so did the squadron commander. Now, that squadron commander didn't have a Ranger tab because he was armor. But regardless, he thought that I definitely did a great job, and he tried to convince me to stay in the Army. I had made my decision at that point. And I'll get to my point, is that I made the decision based on how I was treated and how it affected my mental health. If you combine Ranger School and the effects that it had on me physically, mentally, psychologically, and especially how I was treated by numerous officers, peers, superiors, and individuals, mostly officers. There were some NCOs involved in that as well. But I'm saying the term officers because the prominent individuals that really convinced me to leave the Army were officers, not enlisted. All in all, there were some toxic NCOs for sure. But I had much better interactions with a lot of the NCOs, and especially the enlisted soldiers, who I actually did gain a lot of respect. You know, some of you might doubt that, and that's fine. But, you know, none of you have met me before, or at least most of you probably haven't. And I did gain respect when I was a platoon leader from enlisted soldiers, because despite the fact that I didn't go to, or I didn't pass Ranger School, I tried to treat people with respect, and I tried to do things. I'm not saying I was in any way close to perfect, absolutely not. But I did try to treat people with respect, and I did try to care for my soldiers, and a lot of them saw that. And anyways, mental health is the primary reason that I decided to get out of the Army, okay? It's taken me a long time to come to terms with whether or not I was really going to talk about this. I've thought about it for years, and I finally just decided that this is something that happened to me. You know, people can say it doesn't define me as a person, and I agree, but it did affect me at a very, very high level. And I do believe that there is a very big stigma around even talking about mental health. And, you know, if I can even just reach one person, if almost nobody watches this video, you know, that's okay, because I think I'm getting benefits right now myself, talking about the struggles that I had with basically years of being told that I was a piece of for not having a Ranger tab. And yes, it did affect me. And, you know, people, not everyone, but there's going to be people that will belittle me in the comments. There's going to be people, again, that are going to make assumptions about who I am. There's going to be people that are going to say that I quit, that I did this and that I did that. And that's fine. I expect that. And I thought long and hard about putting this out, and I'm putting it out despite the fact that I know that that's coming. And it's because I think this message is important. I think there's people that could hear this message that might not even be in the military. Maybe they're struggling with something in their life. Maybe it's a divorce. Maybe they got in a bad car accident, you know, and maybe they broke some limbs. Maybe they can't walk. There's people that are in much, much more severe condition than me who might benefit from this message, maybe, you know. So that's the message that I want to put out there, is that, you know, unfortunately, this thing happened to me, and it affected my mental health drastically. It convinced me that I didn't have value anymore, that I wasn't going to be successful. This is 13 years later, and I'm finally deciding to talk about this. And, you know, I'm sure I'm going to have people question the mental health thing. I've thought about this. Trust me, I have family that wouldn't want me to be talking about this and just different things like that. But you know what? I decided that this is my personal journey, and it's time to start talking about it. And yeah, it did affect my mental health. I did test positive for severe anxiety and depression and other things, such as traumatic mental health symptoms, okay? And it's because of how I was treated. It's because of me putting so much pressure on myself, because of the system in the Army that basically said that I am an absolutely worthless human if I didn't pass this school, which I did the best I could. I didn't end up passing. I tried to go back. The Army sent me back, brought me back, I should say, after the government shut down. I talk all about that in my first video that I put out. But long story short, I probably could have gone back to Ranger School, by the way. If I decided to go in, they probably would have sent me before Captain's Career Course. But I had had enough, and I made the decision that this wasn't worth it to me. Here's another thing, and I meant to say this earlier, but I guess I'll mention it now. As I was a senior cadet, waiting to hear back, they called it the OML, the Ordered Merit List, if you're a cadet. And they do that a lot, I think, in the military, but that was a big deal as a cadet, was to have this Ordered Merit List where you put your name on a list and you got to choose which branch you wanted. And if you were higher up on the ordered merit list, you would have a higher chance to get, you know, what branch that you wanted. And again, this is not me trying to brag. Some people are going to take it that way, and there are going to be trolls for sure. People are going to try to tear me down. This is not me trying to brag. This is me sharing my story. And yes, I was ranked as a top cadet. I did earn the Distinguished Military Graduate among top cadets in the country. And I had a conversation with the PMS, who's the professor of military science. I'll leave his name out as well. And he brought me into his office, and I think he did this with all the cadets, so I was not special to go into his office at all. But what he did want to talk about is how I was ranked in the country and how I could choose to get any branch that I wanted. He said that. He couldn't guarantee it, but he showed me the scores, and he said, based on your scores, you are ranked very highly. So you are very likely to get your top choices, which the hardest choices to get, if you're not familiar, would be, the top would probably be aviation, then under that infantry, and then probably armor and military intelligence, somewhere around there. Well, this officer happened to be a military intelligence officer, so he was probably biased in that regard, but he also said that he thought that I would make a very good either aviation officer or military intelligence officer. And he had a full-blown conversation with me trying to convince me not to choose infantry. And he said that because of my analytical skills, he's like, listen, you can go infantry if you want, but he kind of did say, like, you're going to be met with different things and there's a different culture in there. And he's like, or you could go aviation or military intelligence. And I was a type A personality, and even though I know now that maybe infantry certainly wasn't the best choice, it didn't matter to me at the time, because what I wanted was infantry. I wanted to be a top performer, and as a cadet, I felt like the top performers, I mean, a lot of them did go aviation too, so I shouldn't say that, but there was definitely this culture of trying to be the best and trying to take on the toughest challenges, and in a lot of ways, that is what I've tried to do in life. I know some of you might question that because you're like, oh, he failed Ranger School, and that's fine. But that is what I've tried to do in life, and I decided to go infantry despite him saying that he thinks I would make a better military intelligence officer. But I made my choice, and the rest is history. And, you know, I guess I don't have too much else to say on the topic aside from the fact that, you know, this is a real situation that I went through. And I guess I am glad that I finally talked about it. And I want to summarize by, again, just thanking people for so much positive support on that video. I did mention here that there were trolls, and there certainly was. I've actually deleted quite a few comments just because if people are just straight up trolling and just being really, really mean, I'm just going to delete it. I'm not interested in seeing it. If people are putting out constructive feedback without being overly cruel, I have tried to reply to those comments. I'm not just trying to delete everything. But there has been a lot of people that have provided very positive feedback, people that are tabbed. And again, that has surprised me based on my own biases and experiences. And I want to thank those people again. And just all the other people. There's a lot of other people that have provided very kind words to me. And I never expected it, honestly. I didn't think that these videos were going to do well. I just thought that I was going to make these videos to basically talk into the camera and kind of almost like a self-therapy where I'm talking about my struggles. So I want to thank you guys for listening. And if you enjoyed any of this content, you can subscribe for more, and I'll catch you soon.